The Gestapo came at 7 in the morning. They took all of us. My parents and my youngest brother were lucky. They managed to see Hans and Sophie to say goodbye. In my view, the Third Reich, the Nazis, nationalism, the Germans still haven't come to terms with them.
They heard the heavy boots on the stairs before the knock came. It was February 13th, 1942. Tita and Dora Gorter knew what that sound meant. Betrayal had arrived. The two unmarried sisters, known in The Hague for their quiet routines and book-filled home, had lived double lives for years. By day, they were ordinary women. By night, they were crucial links in the Dutch resistance, hiding fugitives, relaying messages, and defying Nazi rule with quiet courage. Now the Gestapo was at their door. This wasn't just a raid. It was the unraveling of one of the most discreet yet vital resistance circles in the Netherlands. What happened next would take them from a city apartment to solitary confinement, and finally to the gates of Ravensbrück, a Nazi concentration camp for women. Their story is one of quiet strength, deadly risk, and a legacy stitched in thread and defiance. Tita Gorter was born in 1879 in Winschoten. Her younger sister, Theodora Hermina, known as Dora, followed in 1888, born in Assen. They were daughters of Judge Tita Gorter and Hermina Viator, raised in a family where discipline, culture, and education mattered deeply. But the sisters' early years were marked by tragedy. Their mother died in 1893, followed just 4 years later by their father's death in 1897. Tita was only 18. Dora was just 9. Orphaned, the girls were taken in by an aunt in Haarlem. There, they grew up in a household that valued books, music, and independence, qualities that would shape their later lives. Despite the age difference, the sisters formed a tight bond. Tita, the elder by 9 years, became a second mother to Dora. They would remain inseparable until their final days. As they grew into adulthood, both chose not to marry. In an era when women were expected to marry and settle down, they chose a different path: intellectual fulfillment, independence, and eventually, resistance. The deaths of their parents may have taken their family, but it forged their resilience and deep loyalty to one another. These early years, steeped in loss, but also rich in self-reliance and education, laid the emotional foundation for the courage they would show decades later. The sisters knew early how to rely on themselves and each other. When the world would later fall apart under Nazi rule, that unshakable bond would become their greatest strength. The knock came at odd hours sometimes, not from the Gestapo, not yet, but from strangers in trouble. A coded note, a frightened face at the door, and Tita or Dora Gorter would wordlessly open their home on Snellestraat 82 in The Hague, let someone in, and lock the door behind them. On paper, they were ordinary. Dora worked at De Nederlanden van 1845, a well-known insurance company. She kept her head down, followed the rules. Her job was safe, predictable, exactly the kind of cover she needed. Tita, 9 years older, worked as a literary translator. She moved in intellectual circles, translating German works and writing essays. She had connections with well-known Dutch thinkers like Menno ter Braak, but nothing about their day jobs gave away what they were preparing for. They lived quietly, in a modest home filled with books and silence. But their house became a meeting point for people in danger. Refugees, resistance couriers, and even key figures like Gerard Dogger and Koos Vorink passed through their door. Sometimes they stayed hidden there for weeks, sometimes only a few hours. The Gorter sisters weren't impulsive. They planned. They listened. And when the time came, they acted. Their shared life, childless, unmarried, and under the radar, was a perfect mask for what they were building. A resistance cell operating out of a quiet street in The Hague. They didn't advertise their beliefs, but they had long rejected fascism. They watched as their Jewish friends were dismissed from jobs, arrested, or disappeared. They read banned papers. They talked, quietly, about what they could do. And when people started asking for help, Real, life or death help. They didn't hesitate. They didn't carry guns. They carried names, maps, addresses, written in code or memorized. And when the Nazis tightened their grip on the Netherlands, the Gorter sisters tightened their network. Tita and Dora had been watching the rise of National Socialism with growing disgust for years. But watching turned into acting when they joined a web of underground groups, including the Orde OD, and Contact Holland. These were not large, organized movements. They were messy, dangerous alliances of trust. One weak link could get you killed. At first, the work was simple. Passing on illegal newspapers like Het Parool or Trouw, typing up leaflets on a smuggled typewriter, or delivering messages by bicycle. But soon, their home became more than just a distribution point. It became a shelter. They hid Jews, resistance fighters, and men trying to avoid forced labor in Germany. Some stayed a few days. Others, like the resistance leader Koos Vorink, found safety behind the Gorter sisters' curtains for far longer. Tita and Dora were methodical. They didn't act out of impulse, but out of a deep sense of duty. They asked questions, checked names, knew how to disappear into the background. That made them valuable and trusted members of the resistance. They kept their work hidden even from neighbors. The curtains stayed drawn. The front door always locked. If anyone asked, they were just two quiet sisters living out their days with books and knitting. But behind the silence was movement. People being led to safe houses, messages passed to London, ration cards forged. They handled it all without ever raising suspicion, until someone betrayed them. In early 1942, Dutch collaborators Poes and Slagter started hunting resistance members for rewards. The sisters' names landed on their list. Someone talked, and just like that, all the caution, all the code words, all the silent courage couldn't protect them anymore. On the morning of February 13, 1942, the doorbell rang. The men who came for them weren't German. They were Dutch, Poes and Slagter, two known collaborators who made their living hunting down people like the Gorter sisters. The arrest was swift. No time to hide papers, no time to warn anyone. Tita and Dora were pulled from their home and taken to the Oranjehotel, the infamous prison in Scheveningen. There, everything changed. Tita was placed in solitary confinement. A single cell, bare walls, a cot, a bucket, no conversation, no light, no sense of time. But even in silence, she resisted. She found scraps of toilet paper and used a pencil stub to write messages, notes of encouragement, quotes, small prayers, and passed them through cracks in the wall. She embroidered names of fellow prisoners into handkerchiefs with stolen thread. Nothing loud, nothing heroic. But in a place designed to break people, she left traces of life. Dora, in the general women's ward, tried to maintain a sense of order. She helped calm new prisoners, shared whispered news, and kept the stories going. The ones that reminded people who they were before the cells, before the arrests. The sisters weren't allowed to see each other, but sometimes they would hear a cough or a shuffle in the hall and wonder, is that her? The Oranjehotel was a place of waiting. Some prisoners were released, others transferred, some simply vanished. Tita and Dora waited for over 10 months, never knowing what would come next. Interrogations were brutal, but they said little. They didn't name names. They didn't beg. They had already made their choice. In December 1942, they were told they would be moved. No one told them where. Just a train, just a list, just another step into the unknown. The resistance didn't forget them. Others tried to track their transfer, but by the time they were loaded into a transport truck, it was already too late. They were bound for Germany. The train doors slammed shut behind them. No seats, no windows, just darkness, straw, and the smell of fear. Tita and Dora Gorter were packed into a freight wagon with dozens of other women, bound for Ravensbrück, one of Nazi Germany's largest concentration camps for women. They arrived in the freezing cold of January 1943. The air was thick with smoke from the crematorium. Guards shouted orders in German. Dogs barked. Prisoners stumbled off the train, disoriented and weak. The Gorter sisters were given numbers, stripped of their names, and forced into camp uniforms. Ravensbrück was a place built to erase people. But even here, Tita and Dora found ways to hold on to their dignity. Tita continued to stitch names into cloth scraps, helping women remember who they were. Dora shared food, even when rations were nearly nothing. They stayed quiet, but alert. They helped others survive in small ways, by listening, by holding a hand, by not giving up. Their strength wasn't loud. It was the kind that happened in moments no one else saw. For over 2 years, they endured the cold, the hunger, the forced labor, and the constant threat of death. And then, as the war neared its chaotic end, the Nazis began clearing out the camp. Between 16th February and 6th March 1945, the Gorter sisters were executed. No trial, no records, just a line, a bullet, and silence. Their bodies were never recovered. No one knows the exact day they died, but survivors remembered them. They spoke of the quiet sisters from The Hague who helped keep them human in a place built to destroy that very thing. Tita and Dora didn't die heroes in a blaze of gunfire. They died as they had lived, calm, brave, and helping others until the very end. The war ended. The camps were liberated. But the Gorter sisters never came home. Still, they left something behind. In the Verzeets Museum in Amsterdam, a small embroidered handkerchief sits behind glass. Stitched into its fabric are names: prisoners, friends, women who refused to be forgotten. It was Titia's work, done in secret during her months in the Oranjehotel and Ravensbrück. Her handwriting, converted into thread, survived when her body did not. Letters written on scraps of toilet paper were smuggled out and kept by fellow prisoners. Some made their way into archives, others into private collections. They weren't dramatic. They were thoughtful, quiet, and deeply human. That's how the Gorter sisters are remembered, not just for what they did, but how they did it. Their story has been included in exhibitions about women in the resistance, about the power of silence, and about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Unlike many resistance heroes, they weren't soldiers, saboteurs, or spies. They were 2 women in their 50s and 60s who opened their home and risked their lives without expecting praise. They weren't famous, and they didn't seek attention. That's exactly why their story matters. Schools now teach about the risks people like them took. Some streets bear their names. Visitors to the Oranjehotel Memorial learn how 2 sisters helped others in the darkest moments of history. And every time someone reads one of their letters or sees the careful embroidery, the message is clear. They tried to erase us, but we left a mark. The door slammed. The boots echoed down the hallway. That moment, the arrest, could have been the end of their story, but it wasn't. Tita and Dora Gorter didn't fight with weapons. They fought with their home, their choices, their silence, and their strength. What they did wasn't loud, but it mattered. It saved lives. It stood against hate. They were 2 sisters, ordinary on the outside, unshakable on the inside, who faced the darkest part of history and didn't back down. Their names live on, not just in museums, but in the quiet courage they still inspire.